I'm a professor here at the Indian Statistical Institute. I'll be the moderator for this panel discussion on... I thought it's on. Okay. So I'll be the moderator for this panel discussion on the universal basic income. And we'll hear about not only the Indian context, but also about the American context. So we have a very distinguished panel of speakers, not all of whom are here yet, but the last one will be shortly. So we will begin with Debraj Ray, who is a professor at New York University. He is co-editor of the American Economic Review. I don't know why I'm saying all this, because everybody knows you, but anyway, he's a distinguished economic theorist. He's an author of the widely used textbook, Development Economics. I think I got the title right. He's well known for his work on game theory, income distribution, polarization, conflict, etc., etc. If I listed all of them, we'd be here for, that would take up half an hour. He's also formerly professor here at the ISI and a good friend. Our second speaker will be Kalle Moene, who's professor at the University of Oslo. His main field of activity has been distribution issues and comparison of financial institutions, especially in the labor market. He has a very well-known piece of work on wage equality, in which he shows that a generous welfare state contributes to wage compression, and wage compression in turn provides increased support for a generous welfare state. And he's also known as an original thinker with a pointed pen, at least according to Wikipedia. Yeah, they don't say anything that nice about you, Debraj. Our third speaker is Rajiv Sethi, who is professor at Barnard College and external faculty at the Santa Fe Institute. Also a distinguished economic theorist. He's well known for his work on segregation, inequality, and crime. And he's presently writing a bestseller on racial stereotypes and crime. Then we have Himanshu, who is associate professor at JNU and a fellow at CSH. It's thanks to Himanshu that you got that nice dinner and wine yesterday. He's one of the foremost scholars on poverty and inequality in India. And his areas of research include issues related to, in addition to poverty and inequality, employment, food security, and agrarian change. And finally, our fifth speaker, who has not yet arrived, but I hope will arrive shortly, is Amarjit Sinha, who is Secretary in the Ministry of Rural Development, Government of India. So that's the ministry that has overall charge of the National Rural Employment Guarantee Program that you must have heard about in this conference if you attended any sessions, or if you attended more than 2 sessions. Welcome, Amarjit. Yeah. So as I was saying, the Rural Development Ministry has overall charge of the National Rural Employment Guarantee Program that people at this conference have heard a lot about. So Amarjit is a Bihar cadre officer of the Indian Administrative Service and has worked in many different positions as a civil servant in his career, one of them being, he's also been a specialist on education. And in addition, he has also been in charge of the Training Academy for Civil Servants. So welcome, Amarjit. So with those very brief introductions, I will ask Debraj to begin. As I have already said in an email, it's 10 minutes for each speaker, and I have a clock on my phone, which has got a timer, so actually 10 minutes.
Are you starting now?
It will take me a few seconds.
Sorry. Am I supposed to move around or what? I can get some. Next slide. Now it's not working. I think it's like, oh, thank you, but I also need next slide. There you go. There you go. Ah, okay.
There we go. Okay.
Hang on.
Not yet. I'm not yet pressing start. Don't worry.
Okay.
Start.
Well, this should have been, maybe this should have been a panel on demonetization. Then we would have been finished in 2 minutes. But, okay. But it's not a panel on demonetization, but I still want to use one of my 10 minutes to thank the Indian Statistical Institute, because I've been associated with this conference for so many years. Trideep has used me regularly as a residual claimant when one of the sessions was empty. Okay, Debraj Ray, you have to say something. But I think finally he got fed up with me, and so he's put me in one of these 10-minute sessions.
Speak in the mic.
Really?
These are the other rooms.
Oh, I feel like a cabaret dancer. Okay, fine. Okay, so it's a real pleasure to be here, and I also wanted to thank Trideep for his stewardship of this conference over so many years. Anyway, this is a topic on which we cannot be done in 5 minutes, and
That's why I gave you 10.
that's why. But we'll be done on it in 10 minutes. Yeah. Okay. So this is an idea, I think, whose time has come, and this is a very interesting quotation that I read from the Boston Globe. Advances in technology are now so visibly exponential in nature that we can expect to see a lot more milestones being crossed long before we would otherwise expect. These exponential advances, most notably in terms of artificial intelligence limited to specific tasks, we are entirely unprepared for as long as we continue to insist upon employment as our primary source of income. And that ends with this great line, with jobs are for machines, life is for people. And I think, at least in developed countries, not so much in India, this has been the impetus for thinking about the notion of universal basic income. And as you know, this is very much in the air. There are countries which have been trying this thing out, even though not very successfully, as in the, okay. As in the case of Switzerland, they had a referendum in June, which was shot down, but Finland is trialing basic income. There are regional, autonomous regions like Macau, which are where universal basic income has been in place since 2008. And the first country to actually do this was Iran in 2010, which took its previous energy subsidies and channeled it into a basic income for over around $500 per person per year. So, you know, it's a very interesting concept, this idea of universal basic income, to give people an income to essentially liberate themselves from the drudgery of everyday work. The idea being that they would be free to pursue whatever they like, including work, of course. Yeah? But it has some interesting precursors as well. One of probably the main precursor is the Alaska Dividend, or the Alaska Permanent Fund, right, which is based on Thomas Paine's immortal words that man doesn't own the earth. Yeah? And this fund actually pays out about $1,000 per person per year. It's jealously safeguarded by the residents of Alaska, where it was once put to them as a quasi-referendum if they could use this fund for government spending. 85% of them said no, we do not want this fund to be diverted in any way. Yeah. Then there is the Norwegian government's pension fund global, which has hit $850 billion this year, right? $850 billion for 5 million measly Norwegians, yeah? I think it's incredibly unfair, but there it is, right? To compare with Alaska, Alaska has 50 billion for 700,000 people, so this is a much bigger fund, but it's not paid out as universal basic income. So meanwhile, in India, we've been converging to the idea of universal basic income from different directions, you know? There's actually been experiments on universal basic income that have been carried out in India, notably in Madhya Pradesh, with interesting outcomes that you can read about. Look at the work of Sewa and Guy Standing, who has worked with them. There's been resource-based. We also have our version of the Alaska dividend. We have the Goa Iron Ore Permanent Fund, which was actually pushed by the Supreme Court in 2014, directing that 10% of all the sales of iron ore should go into this fund as a permanent dividend fund for its people, which I think is incredibly ahead of its time, yeah, in the Indian context. And finally, this is the stuff that we all know about, that we all feel this sense of total exasperation, right, with the subsidies that the government of India provides. Yeah, I know, 5 minutes, okay. Cash versus kind in the PDS system, conditional versus unconditional as in NREGA, and then just too many, too much, right, subsidies of all kinds. So this is just for you to look at very quickly. The explicit subsidies in India amount to about 4% of GDP. If you look at implicit subsidies, which are extremely difficult to actually calculate. If somebody wants to write a dissertation on what are the subsidies in India, I would be very interested in reading that dissertation, because on this, there can be a huge amount of argument. But one would, I think, tentatively agree that it's about 6% of GDP. So the total that we're talking about is about 10% of GDP, but hidden in a plethora of different forms. And we can discuss that in the panel discussion. Just, this is leaving out stuff like NREGA and health and education, okay? It's interesting to note, by the way, that NREGA is smaller than the subsidy that's given for corporate tax. That's something I didn't know, but I found interesting. So one reaction that people have explored is just hand this stuff out unconditionally, okay? Let's just hand it out unconditionally. And then you will meet a whole bunch of people who will say, no way are you going to do that, because we have serious concerns about it. And there are actually two major concerns and one sort of not so major concern. The first is that the promise of cash can be inflated away. And every time you talk to someone like Jean Drèze or Ritika Khera, you know, this is the answer that you're going to get from them. A government can always inflate out cash, but it can't inflate out kind. And this is one issue. The second is that universal basic income is understandably a very tough call for poor countries. Yeah? I've actually done the calculations using the monthly poverty line for India. If you want to give the monthly poverty line to everybody as UBI, you'll be using about 12% of India's GDP. It's tantalizingly close to the 10% of subsidies that we do hand out. So it's not beyond the range of comprehension, but it's there. Okay? And finally, what I call the fourth fundamental law of capitalism, which I'm happy to explain why I call it the fourth law, what the other three are, etc. But the fourth law states that under sustained per capita income growth, you must have unbounded profit wage inequality. And I can come back and discuss this later. And because of this, what I want to propose, and this is my starting point of the panel discussion and the ending point of my talk, is the notion of the universal basic share. I claim that the universal basic share gets rid of all of these problems simultaneously. I'm obviously making an excessive, I still have 2 minutes. Okay, good. I claim that this gets rid a lot of these problems simultaneously for the following reasons. A, that it is, no, by the way, what is a universal basic share? I claim that we should try and commit a fixed fraction of GDP to the provision of universal basic income, rather than commit a fixed number. And oddly enough, every country that I know which has tried out UBI has tried it out in the form of a number and not a fraction. And the first thing about it is that it's country neutral. You can start small. When the country grows, you grow with it. There's no indexing needed. It will move with nominal GDP. It shares prosperity and therefore avoids constant renegotiation in the face of the fourth fundamental law, right? You'll have to renegotiate each time when inequality goes up. It mimics sharecropping because governments also need insurance in bad times. The governments pay out less. And finally, it softens the capital-labor dichotomy. And Kalle and I have been working quite a bit on this, and Kalle will be the next person to talk about it. I've finished.
Yes, and
okay.
You have 45 seconds left.
Okay, good. I'll leave that to you.
is it? I can see.
Wait, just minimize that object.
So this is Debraj's 45 minutes, seconds left that he entertain you.
No. You get all of that.
So control that. Okay. Thank you for having me. I come from Norway. I'm not going to talk about the Norwegian oil coin, as we call it, but I will talk of something that is based on experiences from Northern European countries. Northern European countries. So let me start immediately. Whoops. So I'm going to focus on the share component, on the universal basic share that Debraj mentioned. I'm going to repeat somewhat maybe that something that he mentioned, and I'm going to say the first thing that this is in one way it is a kind of Nordic model light. It's not so important that it is Nordic model light or strong, but the important thing is that there are some experiences from having a share going of the income going to the total population in a universal manner. And that has going on since the 1930s in Northern Europe, in particular in Sweden and Norway. And it's organized in many different ways. It's organized via a welfare state. It's organized via strong unions that negotiate on a very central level. It's organized by strong farmers associations, the world's strongest employee association actually. So the whole thing builds up as that they have all kinds of sharing agreements, even though they are not called that, and even though they are not sort of a specific share written down in laws. Actually, we have very little law, few laws on this in this area, because it's helped by strong collective organizations that are substitute for strong laws. So some of these experiences, even though they are not the same as introducing universal basic share, we can learn something from these experiences, for good and bad, I would say, but basically good. Just to mention one thing, because people think that these things are drags on economic growth, they are drags on economic performance, but Sweden and Norway had higher economic growth per capita, excluding oil, from in the Norwegian case, than the US, since 1935 till today. And if these things are so bad, this shouldn't happen. And it has happened, so we can conclude that there's something in it. We should be more curious. And I think it is the sharing aspect, the share aspect of the proposal, in addition, of course, that it is universal. As a sort of Debraj alluded to, then universal here has a double meaning. It fits for all countries, but it also has no targeting. And most of the welfare spending in Northern European countries have no targeting at all. And there is a strong, I would say, both a theoretical claim and an empirical experience that universal welfare programs imply a higher guaranteed income for all, inclusive the worst off, compared to targeted programs. And this is because they are more popular, they have more popular support, and it is since they have more popular support, they are more generously funded, and since they are more generously funded, even the worst off get more than the same group would have gotten if you had more targeted programs specific for the worst off group. So all these arguments that in order to save money, we should have targeted programs, they seem to sort of contradict the experiences. The further you come in Europe, the more universal the welfare state is, and the higher is the benefits going to the worst off group, even though the same benefits go to all. So this means that a program like Universal Basic Share is likely to be popular in the country that is implied. And we talk a little bit more about that. So I think about this as a sort of that Universal Basic Share could be implemented as the 18th additional goal to the UN's social development goals. So it would sort of complement both the goal 1 and goal that end poverty in all its forms, and it will also reduce inequality within and among countries, goal 10. And then it should state that every country in the world should commit to a UBS at least X% of the national income in the country. Of course, it would be enforced in a dogmatic manner, but it would be something that can be used as a sort of as a political device. You can argue on the basis of this. Is something wrong with our country? We can't fulfill our international commitments. So I think I'm speaking as if we had this in order. Thank you. So it can take many forms. I think, again, Debraj mentioned some. They can be, in part, provisions in kind. It can be insurance against loss of income. It can be guaranteed income paid to, or guaranteed paid employment. It can be school feeding programs. And, of course, it can be cash given to everybody. But here it is, the question is, the trade-off here is between flexibility and sort of possibility of cheating on the program, political cheating on the program, that you say that actually military spending is part of the benefits to everybody because you benefit from it. So the more specifically it is for social spending, and maybe the more specifically it is handed out in cash, the easier it is to supervise it. So I build a talk on this this claim here. I just listed up without arguments. I know that everybody agrees that the highest pay in most countries are inefficiently high, and the lowest pay are inefficiently low. So I think improvements in the sense that you raise the lowest income and you keep down the highest income are productivity enhancing and efficiency enhancing. I don't have time to that, but everybody invite me. I can speak longer than you can stay awake about this. Maybe not equally entertaining all the time, but so how does the UBS work, and how does it resemble the Nordic model? First of all, I would say that the UBS empowers labor. It gives people the opportunity to have a voice, to take risks, to invest in their own labor productivity. Too often we take labor productivity as given. Labor productivity, like most other commodities, they are produced. You can put things into them, and then they perform better. So, but many people say that then people won't work, reluctance to work. The experience for Northern Europe is that more welfare spending make people more participating in the labor force. For example, nowhere in the world there's higher female labor force participation than in the countries that pays the most out in unconditional payment via the welfare state or via other arrangement. So it doesn't really fit the experience that it reduces work. On the contrary, when females started to work in the labor force for full in the 1970s in Northern Europe, there was a huge political pressure to extend the welfare state, to take over some of the things that they were doing. So these two things went in tandem. More female labor force participation, more welfare spending enabled more people to go out. And it was not the effect that the reluctance of work. And also these things are used a little bit when rich people inherit. That's also, why don't they stop working? They don't, maybe. But these arguments are used in a very biased way. When poor people get something, they stop working, the argument goes. When rich people get something, not depending on their own work, it's good for the economy. And I think we have to treat equals by equals. I think social cohesion is facilitated by UBS in the sense that people get a sort of collective interest in the performance in the economy. All improvements in the economy, from reallocation of resources in a more efficient manner, you get 10% of the gain if you commit to 10% of the national income. So it is not a substitute for collective organization or for social organization. It's not a substitute for welfare arrangement. It complements them. Of course, there are certain things that you don't qualify for anymore if you have some sort of conditional payment because you have this in the bottom. But it is not meant to be a substitute. It's meant to complement, enhance the working of these arrangements. And collective interest organizations, they work better when they can get the benefit from coordination between them. So, for example, the popularity of special interest groups that really argue for their own special interest, they will be less popular in these, under these conditions, simply because you take directly, you feel directly that they are taking these special interests, are stealing directly from you, and it can be used much more in the collective political discussions. There's also welfare spending in Northern Europe is stimulated by equality in the South. More equality in the income distribution generate more support for welfare spending. More welfare spending help weak groups in the labor market. So this is some sort of an equality multiplier that goes on. It can also go in the other direction, but so far it's basically almost on. This shares risks in the sense that you transform 10% of the tax income that you may pay to finance this into something that's only dependent on fluctuations in the entire economy. Maybe it's not the optimal way of insurance, but it's definitely better than. So this is my last slide. The UBS shares the gains in globalization, and I think this is something that Rajiv is going to talk a little bit about. I think it's very important. I come from a country that exports 50% of what it produces, and done so for 80 years. And of course, these arrangements that basically have that you share things, that makes globalization and international trade much more popular in this part of the world than everywhere else. In the US, for example, 30%, only 30% like globalization. If you ask the same question in Sweden and Norway, it's almost 70% that like globalization. So I think this is first of all, these are benefits that can be equality in one country. Not all countries have to have it at the same time, but of course, the more other countries do it, the more everybody benefit, and the more popular is globalization, and that is important. So then it's an avoidance of any Trump.
Yeah, I think.
Just minimize it.
Oh, okay, so thanks for organizing this panel. I will talk about this from a US perspective almost entirely, but hopefully turn at the end to some issues pertaining to relevance for India. So as Kalle mentioned, there have been a lot of, this discussion in the US at least has been motivated by thinking about the disruptions that have arisen from globalization and technological progress. Debraj mentioned technological progress, Kalle mentioned globalization, so I'll talk a bit about these two shocks. The point is that you have severe locally concentrated employment and income shocks. And the policies that are designed to deal with them, like facilitating transition from one sector to another, facilitating mobility from places that have lost jobs to places that have gained them, are not adequate to deal with this. The shocks are too large and the movements are too costly. And so the result has been a rise in inequality and some major shifts in social indicators. And I'll give you some examples of this that are very, very striking in the US that have something to do with the recent political upheavals there. And the reason, well, to summarize, the gains from trade and immigration are diffuse. Lower cost products or better quality products are diffuse. A lot of people benefit from them. The folks who are displaced by import substitution are concentrated in particular industries, especially particular towns. And so you get this asymmetry. The result is what Danny Roderick has called the politics of anger, rise of interest in protectionism. Not yet resistance to innovation, but quite possibly, given what the quote that Debraj put up. And the question is universal basic income or some variant of it, such as UBS, a better alternative? I want to just talk about some of these disruptions and make them very vivid. So there's a recent memoir by J.D. Vance where he describes his hometown of Middletown, Ohio. It's worth reading this book. It's called Hillbilly Elegy. And he describes this town, which is a little more than a relic of American industrial glory, with abandoned shops, broken windows, homes in disrepair, a lot of street vice, especially drug dealing and drug use. And this is a town that he describes as was once idyllic, And the point is that these are towns that were very, very dependent on one or two big employers. It would be industry towns, and the town was almost synonymous with the employer. And once the employer is gone, the town is basically shattered, both economically and socially. And this has happened over and over again through the Rust Belt in the United States. There's a paper that got a lot of press from Case and Deaton about a rise in midlife mortality among white Americans without college degrees, increasing death rates from drug and alcohol poisoning, suicide, chronic liver diseases, and cirrhosis. And Andrew Gelman and others at Columbia did a follow-up and showed that this effect is disproportionately falling on white women. I'll have more to say about that. Sharp rise in maternal opioid use. This is from last week in JAMA, a paper that found a 7-fold increase over this decade, 2004 to 2013, in drug-dependent newborns. And the hospitals are just not equipped to deal with this kind of thing. It's completely unprecedented. It's happening in rural counties or small towns in rural counties. White female, this is work that I'm doing with Glenn Lowry right now. White female incarceration rates are up 50% since 2000, and black female incarceration rates are down 30%. You've got a similar difference trend for males, but the female composition of the female incarcerated population in the United States, it's only 7%